At the height of my joy, when I thought my only son's wedding would be the crowning moment of my life, I heard the words that shattered everything. Stay in your lane. I had given decades of love, devotion, and sacrifice, only to be told politely and coldly that I was no longer needed. What happened after that changed everything. I thought I knew about love, pride, and what it means to let go. It began on a quiet Sunday afternoon in April. The light was soft through the kitchen window as I made tea the way I always did. Same mug, same 3-minute steep. The small rituals that fill the silence when life gets quieter. My son Andrew sat across from me, tapping his foot, smiling nervously. When he finally said it, "Mom," I proposed. Taylor said, "Yes." I felt my heart swell. My baby boy was getting married. I'd waited years for that moment, dreamed of helping him plan it. I had spent 35 years as a wedding planner in Boston, creating dream days for other families. This one I thought would be ours. I imagined flowers, laughter, maybe even purpose returning to my hands after so many years of stillness. But when I offered to help, his smile faltered. "Taylor already has a vision," he said carefully. "She's really into modern minimalist stuff. She's following this planner online." Then came the sentence that would echo through everything that followed. She said, "It'd be best if you just stayed in your lane." I laughed, pretending not to hear the sting. Surely it was a misunderstanding. Surely no one meant to tell a mother to step aside from her only child's wedding. But when Andrew looked away, instead of laughing, I felt something inside me still. That night, I sat alone in the dark, not crying, not angry, just hollow. I told myself it would pass, that Taylor was overwhelmed, that Andrew was caught in between. But the weeks that followed proved otherwise. At a lunch Taylor hosted to discuss wedding vibes, I arrived dressed softly in peach and gold, carrying a small folder of ideas, timeless florals, lighting tricks, layouts that made memories shine. When I offered to show them, Taylor waved her manicured hand. "That's okay, Margaret," she said, smiling too sweetly. "We're going for something more current, not too traditional." Her friends giggled, one chiming in about TikTok weddings with disco balls and neon palms. "Weddings have really changed," Taylor added, still smiling. "It's just not the whole ballroom lace vibe anymore." The air left my lungs. I folded my folder, nodded politely, and sipped my tea, pretending her mother's whisper. "I told you she'd bring something," hadn't reached my ears. At home that night, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. I'd spent decades giving brides their perfect day. Now my experience was dismissed with a giggle. I could have called Andrew, told him how she'd humiliated me, but I knew how that would go. "You're overreacting, Mom," he'd say. Taylor didn't mean it that way, so I stayed silent. I made tea, put on an old sitcom, and let my heart harden just enough to survive. I tried again, sent them an email with vendor suggestions, ending it gently. "Only if it's helpful. Love, Mom." There was no reply. Not from Taylor, not from Andrew. The silence was louder than rejection. It was erasure. When I stopped by their apartment to drop off a box of Andrew's childhood keepsakes, baby photos, yearbooks, little mementos, I met Taylor at the door. "Oh, that's sweet," she said, taking the box. "But we're doing a digital slideshow. You know, super casual." Andrew appeared awkward between us. They were heading to a venue appointment, Taylor explained. A rooftop, very chic, not the whole mom and dad wedding vibe. I smiled, told them it sounded lovely, and left before the ache could show. That night, I looked through my old planning binders, fabric swatches, color palettes, scribbled notes from couples who had once trusted me with their happiest day. Every inch of those pages held a lifetime of care. Now my own son's fiancée had reduced it all to dated. I tried one last olive branch, a dinner at my home pot roast, and pie his favorite as a child. Taylor complained the moment she walked in. "It smells intense," she said. "I don't really eat red meat." I stayed calm, patient, polite. When I gently suggested a seamstress, I knew she set her cup down sharply. "Margaret," she said, voice sweet but firm, "I feel like you're not hearing us. We just want everyone to stay in their lane so things go smoothly." The second time I heard those words, they landed differently. Not as an insult, but as a boundary I would finally honor. That night, as the dishes cooled in the sink, I realized something I had been written out of their story. I'd been reduced to a relic, something pretty to keep around, but never use. So I decided to stop offering myself where I wasn't wanted. I stopped calling, stopped emailing. I stayed in my lane, but I did it on my own terms. I withdrew the wedding fund my late husband and I had saved for decades, money meant as a blessing, and left only a small token. I sent a modest check with a short note, wishing them joy. When Andrew showed up later, angry and confused, asking why I wasn't covering everything, I looked him in the eye and said, "Because I wasn't invited to be part of anything." It was the first time I had ever said no to him, and the first time I truly felt free. Andrew stared at me that evening like he didn't recognize the woman sitting across from him. He had always known me as the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who filled silence with reassurance. Now my calm refusal seemed to unsettle him. "Taylor's going to freak out," he said, finally running a hand through his hair. I shrugged, not out of indifference, but out of release. "She already has everything she wanted," I said softly. "Control, a vision, the stage. I just chose to stop paying for the ticket." He didn't know how to answer, so he didn't. When he left, I didn't follow him to the door. I didn't ask him to call. I just let him go. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to rescue my own child from his choices. Days passed quietly. The house felt different, lighter, cleaner, as though I had dusted away decades of expectation. I went about my days pruning the garden, volunteering at the library, reading late into the night. And then, one morning, the phone rang. It was Andrew. His voice was low, cracked. "She's gone," he said. Who, I asked, though. Part of me already knew. The planner, Savannah Bloom, she took the money, all $55,000. The words settled like ice in my chest. I had seen this kind of story before, young couples dazzled by pretty promises and perfect photos. "Did you vet her?" I asked quietly. "Was she licensed?" Silence. Then Taylor handled that part. I closed my eyes, picturing the two of them signing contracts over coffee, mistaking filters for credibility. "Her website's gone," he continued. "Phone disconnected. Everything wiped." I didn't gloat. I didn't even sigh. I simply said, "I'm sorry, because even hard lessons deserve empathy." "Taylor's blaming me," he whispered. "She says if you'd just paid for the wedding, this wouldn't have happened." I could almost hear the echo of that phrase, "stay in your lane," now collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. In the weeks that followed, their picture-perfect engagement unraveled. Deposits lost, vendors canceled, friends whispering, I heard the details secondhand from neighbors and mutual acquaintances. They postponed, someone said. No canceled, another corrected. But I knew the truth. It wasn't just the wedding that had fallen apart. It was the illusion that had built it. Taylor's obsession with image. Andrew's fear of conflict. They had built a house out of glass, and it had finally shattered. I didn't call him. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd learned the difference between caring and rescuing. Sometimes love means letting people face their reflection without softening the mirror. Months passed in a strange kind of peace. I began to live differently. I went for morning walks, joined a ceramics class, even laughed when my clay bowl came out lopsided. I started to remember who I had been before I was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's planner. For years, my worth had been measured in how much I gave. Now I was learning how to keep. I didn't erase Andrew from my life. His photo still sat on the mantel, but I stopped holding my breath for his call. Healing, I realized, doesn't always look like reunion. It sometimes looks like solitude that doesn't hurt anymore. Then one morning at the grocery store, I ran into a friend who couldn't wait to tell me the latest. "Did you hear?" she whispered. Taylor moved back in with her mother. "The wedding's off for good." I nodded politely, offering the kind of quiet sympathy reserved for tragedies you saw coming. Later that night, I sat in my living room with the lights dimmed, the silence soft around me. I wasn't happy they had failed. I was sad for what they had built, without foundation, for the years Andrew would now spend realizing he'd mistaken control for love. Weeks later, news broke about Savannah Bloom. Her smiling face appeared on television, framed by the headline, "Social Media Wedding Planner Vanishes with Hundreds of Thousands in Client Deposits." She had scammed multiple couples across the country. I watched from my kitchen table, coffee cooling in my hands, as one bride after another spoke through tears. When they mentioned Andrew and Taylor as local victims, my heart twisted. Victims, yes, but not only of a con artist. They had been victims of their own vanity, their own blindness. They wanted a show, not a marriage. And when the curtain fell, they had nothing left behind it. I didn't reach out, but I knew eventually Andrew would. Because once the noise fades, when the hashtags and the heartbreak settle, people remember where the quiet love came from. And mine had always been there, steady as the tea I brewed each morning. I wasn't waiting for him, but I wasn't closing the door either. I had learned something precious in those silent months, that peace is not loneliness. It's freedom from being unseen. And then one crisp November afternoon, I saw him again. Not at my door, not with a grand apology, just walking down my street, head low, hands in pockets, a man who had finally been humbled by life. He stood at the gate for a long moment before he spoke, as though afraid the sound of my voice might undo him. "Hi, Mom," he said finally, and for the first time in years, the word didn't carry guilt or defensiveness. It carried softness. I opened the gate and stepped aside. "You hungry?" I asked. He nodded, almost sheepish. I made him lunch, nothing fancy. Roasted vegetables, warm bread tea, steeped for exactly 3 minutes the way I'd always done. We didn't talk about Taylor. We talked about small things, work, the neighbor's new dog, the book he was reading. It was almost like rewinding time, peeling away the layers of pride and misunderstanding until all that was left was a son sitting across from his mother again. Only when the plates were cleared did his voice shift. "Her name's Emily," he said quietly. "She's different." I turned, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "Soft kind. She listens." He hesitated, then added, "She asked about you the first time I told her about my past. Not about the wedding, about you. She said she wanted to meet the woman who raised me." The words landed like balm on a wound I hadn't realized was still open. She doesn't want to prove anything, he said. She just wants to build something good. Weeks later, I met Emily. She was warm in a way that didn't need to be performed. Her smile was uncurated, her eyes steady and curious. We talked for hours, not about trends or themes, but about people, about love, about how small gestures make a day memorable. When she mentioned that she and Andrew were thinking about getting married someday, she said it without drama or grandeur. "We just wanted to feel like us," she said. Simple, honest, real. Then, with a sincerity that caught me off guard, she added, "If that day comes, I'd be honored if you'd help plan it." For a long time, I couldn't speak. I had spent years being dismissed, overlooked, erased from something that had once defined me. Now someone was handing me the gift I'd been denied, not as an obligation, but as an invitation. "I'd like that," I said finally, and I meant it. Planning Emily and Andrew's wedding was nothing like the grand productions I'd once orchestrated. It wasn't about chandeliers or color palettes approved by influencers. It was about meaning. We spent weekends together, drinking coffee, sketching out simple designs, wild flowers in mason jars, soft linen runners, handwritten vows. Sometimes we'd get sidetracked, talking about life, about how love wasn't a performance, but a partnership. For the first time in decades, I wasn't managing chaos or smoothing egos. I was creating something genuine, piece by piece, from the heart outward. The venue they chose was a small garden just outside town, one that Emily had visited as a child. The ceremony would be intimate family, close friends, sunlight filtering through autumn leaves. When the day arrived, it was one of those rare afternoons where everything aligned. The air was cool, the sky clear, the world holding its breath in quiet harmony. Andrew stood at the front, his hands trembling slightly. When our eyes met, he smiled an unspoken thank you for staying when it would have been easier to walk away. And then Emily appeared, her dress simple and timeless, her face glowing with quiet joy. There were no gasps, no theatrics, just stillness, the kind of stillness that holds truth. Their vows were short, heartfelt. They didn't promise perfection. They promised presence, forgiveness, patience. As they spoke, I felt something inside me loosen, like the final thread of resentment untying itself and floating away. The reception was small laughter spilling softly into the evening air. The food was home-cooked. The music played by a friend's old guitar, and there wasn't a single centerpiece worth more than a meal. But it was beautiful, honest, in the way life rarely is anymore. Later, as the night settled, Andrew came over and wrapped his arms around me. "Thank you," he whispered. This was everything. Emily joined us, her eyes shining. "You were the heart of this, Margaret. I can't imagine what this day would have been without you." I didn't cry. I just smiled a deep, quiet smile that came from somewhere ancient and peaceful inside me. For years, I had waited for acknowledgement, for validation. But standing there watching them dance, their awkward, joyful first dance under the string lights, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I was enough. I had always been enough. In the months that followed, the three of us settled into something new. Not a performance of family, but the real thing. We didn't talk about Taylor or the money or the wedding that never happened. We talked about ordinary things, recipes, garden soil books, And in those small conversations, I found something more healing than any apology could offer respect, the kind that comes quietly and stays. One evening, Andrew called while I was watering the plants. Emily and I were talking, he said. She said if she could have had anyone plan her wedding, it would be you. She thinks what you do isn't about making things beautiful. It's about making people feel something. I didn't speak right away, just listened as his voice softened. She's right, he said finally. And I'm sorry it took me this long to see that. I looked around my quiet kitchen at the fading sunlight spilling across the counter and felt tears prick my eyes. Not of sadness, but release. It's all right, I said. You see it now. That's what matters. Because sometimes love doesn't return in the way we expect. Sometimes it circles back quietly, carrying lessons and grace instead of apologies. Staying in my lane hadn't been about withdrawal. It had been about rediscovering who I was when no one else was watching. And in the end, it led me exactly where I was meant to be seen, valued, and at peace. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you've ever had to find your own lane again, tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story.